Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast, featuring our neuropsychologist, Dr. Laura Jansons, Dr. Skip Hrin, and neurofeedback legend, Jay Gunkelman. Our goal is to promote options for better mental health. Specifically, we focus on the objective data you can get from a brain map and the positive results of training with neurofeedback. Occasionally, we'll bring on guests who have a different modality. Got to have an open mind, right? This is an all-star cast that are more than happy to share their knowledge with you. Please give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You get to see some behind-the-scenes action. It doesn't always sound as good as it does on the podcast. Nobody likes to see how the sausage is made. It really helps get the word out. If they can't hear us, we can't help them. If you're not a subscriber, please visit neuronoodle.com to sign up for our newsletter. My name is Pete, and today we have on the show Joyce Marter, founder of Urban Balance and author of the Financial Mindset Fix, a mental fitness program for an abundant life. Say that 3 times fast, Joyce.
It's tough.
Joyce, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Pete.
Oh, please tell us about your background. I mean, I can't do it justice. You started out as being a therapist and worked your way up to all the locations and whatnot. Please start from the beginning.
Thank you so much. I am a Buckeye. I'm from Ohio State. And the Ohio State University. And when I started college, like many, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I didn't know what I wanted to major in. And they encouraged us to study what we love. And I found psychology to be so fascinating, and I care about the deeper aspects of our lives, our emotions, our relationships, our connectedness to one another. And I quickly learned that if I didn't want to be a waitress forever, I would need to get a master's degree. And so I came to Northwestern. That's what brought me to the Chicago area. And it was there that I found a language and a lens through which to understand myself, my life, and the world around me. And I felt like I found my people. And when I started graduate school, I was really afraid that my professors were going to see that I deal with an anxiety disorder and that they'd say, Joyce, you can't be a therapist. You have issues. Well, guess what? We all have issues as part of the human condition. And thankfully, the professors recommended we all participate in our personal therapy or counseling. And that was transformative for me. And I've become a fierce mental health advocate. I worked in addictions. I worked in employee assistance program work with companies across the country. And I really saw the need for destigmatizing mental health issues, promoting access to care, and making it accessible and affordable. So I started Urban Balance in the Chicago area, which is an insurance-friendly counseling practice, and grew it one therapist at a time. And I actually successfully sold it a few years ago. And today, Urban Balance has 17 locations in 6 states, over 160 therapists, and I'm honored to be an investor in the parent company. I made 1,000 mistakes during my journey that I'm happy to share with you about being a business owner, and I learned a tremendous amount about the psychology of money, which is what I share in my book and through my public speaking.
And you're a neighbor too. You're in Chicago still?
I am. I'm in Evanston. I loved it. Yeah.
We're in Buffalo Grove, right, Dr. Laura?
That is right. Yep, Buffalo Grove. We had a spot in Arlington Heights and Vernon Hills for a minute.
And then,
beautiful areas.
And then lovely COVID threw us a nice curveball, huh?
Oh my goodness, definitely. And I've been so thankful for telehealth, being able to provide counseling virtually. And then all of my speaking engagements turned virtual. And my business actually grew in the last year and a half because of all the mental health issues that people are experiencing. We were already in a mental health epidemic, and the pandemic added fuel to the fire. And it's my hope that that's the silver lining, because companies across the globe have hired me to do mental health awareness trainings. And we need to spread that message. So I've been very busy and grateful that companies are supporting their employees' mental health and well-being.
So what is urban balance? If I pull up, obviously I've seen the website and whatnot, but how would you describe it to somebody that just, you're in the elevator and hitting floor 24 and you're on floor 2? What's the elevator pitch?
It is an insurance-friendly counseling practice. So we're in network with all insurance companies aiming to make therapy accessible and affordable. So instead of paying $150 out of pocket, many clients pay a $15, $25 copay. We work with most employee assistance programs, which many people don't realize that if they have private insurance, 80% of employees have an EAP benefit that offers some free counseling services per issue per year. And my philosophy for hiring therapists was to hire people who are nice and normal and relatable, because the research shows that if you like your therapist, you make the most progress in therapy. So all of our clinicians have different areas of expertise and different theoretical orientations, but they are all kind and compassionate, client-centered, focused on strengths building, not shaming, very supportive. And we've got locations, throughout the country. And so I'm really proud of the organization. We celebrate the diversity of our staff and our clients and really focus on collaboration.
Now, Dr. Laura and Dr. Skip are smiling there. Feel free to jump in.
Well, I couldn't help, the smile is about, I guess you're not hiring psychologists, and that's not that we're not nice. It's just, you go to a psych convention and it's a room full of weirdos, and that's okay. You know what I mean? Everybody's got their niche, but that was what the smile was. Only that. And I feel like I can make fun of the group I'm a part of, But I am fascinated with this notion of being an advocate for mental health and how that ties into your book. It just, if that's a starting point and everybody's all right with this jumping in there. I do think our relationship with money and abundance, and of course, wealth, however we define it, is integral to health and mental health and how we feel. So can you maybe tell us a little about your book and how that factors into mental health?
Absolutely. Well, first, I want to answer your question about being a mental health advocate. So I've served board leadership positions on a state and national level. I've lobbied with our state senators and representatives to support bills that promote access to care for the poor, the rich, I'm sorry, not the poor, the elderly, for students and veterans. And I do mental health advocacy through my public speaking, through blogging, and it's something that's very important to me. My book was based on basically what I noticed in my practice. As I started working with my clients, no matter what their presenting issue, whether it was depression, anxiety, addiction, they started to, as they made progress in therapy, they started to make more money. They started getting raises and promotions and starting their own businesses. And I was like, why is this happening? And how can I do this? And they said, basically we realized it was because we're always working on their underlying self-worth and self-esteem. And as that improved and they started aligning their work with their deeper self and their greater gifts, they started to prosper financially. And Susie Orman, the financial author, said she noticed the same thing, that self-worth leads to net worth, but net worth does not lead to self-worth. In order to be happy, we have to do our internal work. And I became fascinated in the psychology of money after I've seen thousands of clients over the past 25 years and from all walks of life, and noticed that our psychology of money shapes our financial reality. So our belief systems, and many of us learned those from our families of origin. Many of us have been through financial traumas. Maybe our parents or grandparents have and have passed down beliefs about money because they lived through the Great Depression or other financial traumas as a result of racism and, stigmatization and marginalization of certain populations. And so our thoughts and our behaviors and our relationships with money, it's really our psychology that impacts our ability to follow the very basic money guidelines that we all know, that you have to earn more than you spend, you have to save. That's not rocket science, but it's our human nature that makes it challenging. And so that's what my book is about. I learned through my entrepreneurial journey, as I mentioned, I made 1,000 mistakes. And I had to do some deep work on myself and my own self-esteem and my own relationship with money. And I started my business with $500, $50,000 of student loan debts. And I sold it when it was grossing over $5 million a year for a multi-million-dollar offer. And I never would have thought that that was possible. And I want to share with others that it truly is. And it's not about greed or materialism or the love of money. What I've learned is that when you have more, you can be of greater service in the world through charity, through philanthropy, by offering jobs and internships. As our practice strengthened, we were able to offer pro bono counseling and sliding fee counseling and give donations to charities that our staff believed in. So my book is based on 12 mindsets that I identified through my clinical practice that lead to both improved mental health and financial health. And I had a PhD researcher help me with it, and they are proven to lead to increased financial health and mental health. And I have exercises to help people build these skills because you have to do the work. It's a practice.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question already. You're making me think of, I did do psychotherapy. I'm a neuropsychologist now, but for my first 20 years of psychology, I did psychotherapy in different venues. So in community agencies, so kind of, went that route at first and then went to private practice. And I remember kind of regardless that it was always difficult for me as a therapist at the end of the session to hold my hand out and say, can I have that check? Even if it's a $30 copay or something like that. So what do you tell people exactly? I mean, what do you tell your clients or your co-therapists as far as, how to feel? In these days with neuropsychology, the bills are bigger. And so now we're asking for thousands of dollars. And, as you develop and mature, it becomes somewhat easier for the reasons that you're talking about, that there's value in what I'm doing and what I'm sharing. And some of the things can be priceless. So, that's kind of how I start to think about that. But what do you say exactly? How do you kind of give your message?
Absolutely. And we as clinicians are helping professionals. And as caretakers, we're mission oriented and typically not great about money. We want to be of service, and it feels awkward and uncomfortable. And we are compassionate about people's financial struggle. But I really believe that we do very important work. We have professional degrees. Many of us have taken out enormous student loans, and we deserve financial prosperity and stability and financial health and wellness. So in my professional community, I've worked on task forces where we collaborated with other groups of mental health professionals, and we're able to get a 17% pay increase from Blue Cross Blue Shield for all mental health providers in Illinois. So I believe that when we value ourselves and we set higher standards, that's healthy modeling for our clients. And so we need to ask for what we deserve. When I went through great financial struggle in my business, I had tremendous financial anxiety. I thought I would have to file bankruptcy. And I met with a CPA, and he said, Joyce, you are not running a charity to employ therapists, and you deserve to make a profit. And I realized that my own sort of codependency, sort of detrimental caretaking, making sure that the needs of my staff and clients were met before my own, was causing me financial harm. And so I had to learn how to care about myself. And that's not selfish. It's like the oxygen mask analogy. When we take care of ourselves first, then we're more able to take care of others. And then I actually was able to, pay people more, to offer the sliding fee services. And so I work with people all the time on negotiation and valuing themselves and setting price limits and fees, because it directly relates to our feelings of worth.
If I can kind of jump in on that same topic, my training was, about learning how to do therapy way back in the day, and lots of different aspects and pieces of that basically constituted the training. There wasn't and I mean a singular, there wasn't one course on running the business of a private practice, or even probably more the elephant in the room, which I think you're addressing. And that said, hey, we're all these altruistic folks that want to help people, and it's weird to ask them for money to do it, like Laura just mentioned. And I can't help but thinking of just, religious influences, and even just societal norms and ideas about, hey, if you're rich, you're that, and if you're poor, you're this, all the big issues that you're mentioning. So I guess my question then is, in your trainings, are you able to talk to institutions that are training clinicians? Hey, are you able to get in there and say, hey, like, we got to have this conversation about money because it's real, for all the reasons that you've already touched on, but are you able to do that?
Yes, absolutely. So for about 10 years, I've been giving workshops and trainings on private practice and the business of running a practice. And I use a lot of what I learned from psychology and from my own experiences as an entrepreneur. And I write about this topic. I'm a blogger for Psychology Today. I used to blog for Psych Central, and I have a column called Mental Wealth, where I share some of these ideas. But yes, I recently gave a training for Penske, which is one of the largest continuing education providers in the country, on the business side of psychotherapy. And I think they had 2,300 registrants for that. So I think it's a real need. I wish that more training programs provided more resources. There are many great books and podcasts, and there's an organization called the Group Practice Exchange that provides a lot of this type of information that I would recommend to people. My friend and colleague, Norm Dassenbrook, does a lot of work in this area and has a great book. But yes, I think it's important for professionals who are in private practice to learn this and to get ahead of it, because I learned from having a great mentor, and he challenged me. Like, I remember saying to him, Mark, I'm not going to take insurance because it's just too complicated and I can't understand it. It's time consuming. And he said, yeah, you are. And he just practiced tough love and held my feet to the fire and supported me through it. And that ended up being a cornerstone to my business, because more people were able to participate in therapy, and they stayed longer because they could afford to do so, and they made progress and then referred others. So yes, I do think that this is an important thing that should be taught in programs to set people up for success.
Hey guys, the Olympics are going on, and I don't know if anybody caught any of the headlines. We had a show. Let's see, Joyce, you're local, so we were talking about Justin Fields and epilepsy. And then Naomi Oksana, the tennis player, she had some issues. And now recently on the gymnastic team, Simone Biles, yeah, she, had issues. Finally, you think people are going to start taking this seriously, or not seriously, but having the stigma go away? Because part of what we do is brain scans. We want to help out the athletes there, but the parents of athletes, when the kids are little and their brains are forming and their heads are getting knocked around, hopefully everybody's taking this putting a little bit more attention on it now. Do you guys have any thoughts on Simone and what's been going on? And anybody can pitch in. care?
Sure. She's overcome her circumstances and has excelled in life, and she's still the greatest of all time in her sports, regardless of her withdrawal from the current Olympics. And you have to think back to what she's overcome. Larry Nassar was free to molest young athletes for many, many years. And she was a foster kid and must have been an easy target for him. And I hope he continues to rot in jail for his behavior. But, she basically has asked for our support for her to take care of herself. And, goodness, I'm always going to support people who are looking to for their own mental health. If you roll the clock back, remember Carrie Strug, who had an obvious injury to her leg, and her coach, Bella, forced her basically to complete. Now, she did get her gold medal, but she retired at age 18 due to that injury. And earlier in 1978, Elena Makina, a Soviet gymnast, had a broken leg, and they basically, moving towards the Olympics, realized that she'd have to do practice, and they forced her to take the cast off early. And on her weakened leg, she missed a very complex move and became quadriplegic, and which is entirely possible. If you miss a move and land on your chin, you're going to end up potentially breaking your neck. Now, Simone completed just such a move earlier in the competition. They politically decided to lower her score so that other people didn't try her impossible, death-defying move. So, I support her, because if you're not at your best, feeling the joy of your sport, you can hurt yourself. You can end up being quadriplegic or injured in a rather permanent way. So, I've got nothing but respect for her and for her taking care of herself. We all need to do self-care, and the Olympics also has, bizarre officials making decisions about their wardrobe. I hear that Olympic officials are going to have to wear a mandatory thong from now on. So we'll see how that goes. But I have nothing but respect for Simone, and she is the greatest of all times, regardless of her dropping out. And we had a young athlete who rose to the gold at this point. So, she saw she wasn't going to be there at her best, and she stepped aside, which, I'm old and in the way. I've learned to step aside as well. So, I have, as I say, nothing but respect for her.
And Pete used the word stigma, right? So, there's certainly a stigma for mental health, behavioral health, mental illness. They change the vocabulary as time goes on, but it's still the same issue. I have a niece who's a volleyball player, played in college, and she's out of college now and still plays. And she had made the comment, we rush to the side of people who are physically injured. You get an injury in sports, and the team comes out with their bags and kneels by them, and are you okay? And get them on the stretcher and carry them out. But, do people run to the side? But if there's a mental injury, and that was a great analogy for her to say, as a young person, kind of, knowing, what it feels like to have both of those things. And, to everybody's point here, maybe you can't see, the mental illness, so to speak, or can't you? Like, aren't there things to expect, when you're an athlete at that level, and what the pressures could be, and, the isolation and the, the performance anxieties. I mean, we talk to a lot of people not at that level, but, who are musicians or who are, other athletes at different levels, and the pressure is intense, and how do you not see that? Like, how do you not put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's at that level? We'll sit in the stands and root them on and all of that kind of stuff. But, the elephant in the room. I mean, you said that, Joyce, that, it's the obvious stuff here, but we turn our backs to that. So yeah, it's a cultural phenomenon, and I think we're trying to make headway, us at NeuroNoodle, trying to get the word out. I mean, that's what the podcast is about, and Joyce is getting the word out, and kind of nicking away at it little by little. But obviously it's a problem at different levels.
Absolutely. Well said, Dr. Laura and Jay. I think those are fantastic points. And I just celebrate the bravery and the courage and the openness and authenticity of both Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka, because they serve as mental health champions and a light and an example for others, that these are women that so many people admire and look up to, and they're sharing their story really destigmatizes mental health issues, and it points out some really important issues that need to be addressed in our culture. And Dr. Laura, you mentioned other celebrities, actresses, actors, musicians. I think of Amy Weinberg. I don't know if any of you ever watched her documentary, but she was so struggling with behavioral health issues, and the people around her enabled her, and she died. And so this is about the pressure that we put on people, the perfectionism that we expect, that maybe the coaches expect of them and put on them. I believe that we all need mental health as part of our wellness. My book is called A Mental Fitness Program, because I think we don't only need to exercise our physical bodies, but we need to exercise our minds and spirits, and so that we can be whole and well. And athletes should have access to sports psychologists and counselors. And we need to teach these skills in school. We need to focus on early intervention and prevention. And we need to address issues in the workplace where people experience psychological safety, which, where they can say, this is what I'm experiencing and this is what I need. Mental health issues are covered under the American with Disabilities Act. And people should be able to take care of their mental health without feeling that there's going to be punishment in the workplace. And so I think there's loads of room for improvement for even organizations like the Olympics or the pro tennis and other arenas to improve how they respond and take care of the mental health of their athletes. We need to practice compassion.
Skip?
I don't want to take. Oh, go ahead, Skip. Go ahead.
I'm just dovetailing on where everybody is, but the last piece you ended with of compassion, and so here's a world-class athlete that's doing a different kind of performance, right? Showing us something different, and I think our reaction to it, and here we are talking about it, from our professional and human perspectives, which is, I think, the direction to go, right? Because we're all similarly minded in our response here. It is something different, and with Naomi Osaka, it was different. And I'm thinking back to a couple other guys that played basketball, and Artest and Dennis Rodman in particular, who helped kind of shape how the NBA responded to mental health issues. And it's not that, hey, wow, we're acknowledging that these issues are present, let's do something. It's that people are struggling with issues all the time because they're people. They happen to be world-class athletes. And as Jay's talked about and other guests we've had on the show, maybe they do work a little differently, but nonetheless, they experience these issues. And so then the response, I think, is what might be, I'm hoping, is changing. And we have conversations like this among professionals, and our guest is out there actually doing things and talking to people to hopefully change the discourse. But man, like, what would it take? What does it take for these athletes to, and these two women that are most recent in certainly our discussions, to like go, hey, like, I'm not feeling so hot. I'm obviously underrepresenting that, but to do that on the world stage so that we can have these conversations, like, man, like, not to be corny, but gold medal for that. You know what I mean? It has to allow for other folks to at least be able to see that. and then say, wow, so there is a different choice. I can talk about these things that are upsetting for me, and express it and show it. That's where I kind of am, and not to take away from anybody's personal experience, Simone right here, but like, I mean, I can't help thinking about the ripple for the directions that we're all hoping for this to happen. Like, mental health stuff's real, like it's part of who we are, and keeping it in the back rooms or keeping it stigmatized, like we can't do that. And I don't think anybody on this panel is, advocating for that. But anyway, and we're not a panel, just so you know. But all right, well, that's what I got.
Well, we're talking about world-class athletes. What about grade school gymnasts, right? I mean, high school. The pressures that are going on there. What can the parents do to prepare them, whether it's talk therapy or neurofeedback? Anybody have any advice for the parents to get them to build a foundation of good mental health to handle all this pressure? Because I mean, social media wasn't around, 25 years ago. Now everybody has a camera, everybody has a comment. The internet isn't kind. I'll hang up and listen for my answer.
I'd love to dive in on that. I think having honest conversations about mental health at home is a great place for parents to start, and to talk about their own mental health and their own challenges and struggles, and normalize that. My girls know that I've been in therapy on and off throughout my lifetime. They're 16 and 19. I have them in therapy at different points in my life, when their dad and I divorced, especially, and they've stayed on beyond that. I encourage them to see their school counselors at school, and my older daughter's at college, and she takes advantage of that. It's free, it's available. Parents can communicate with the school counselors. I believe in even teaching them self-care. So there are great apps like Headspace and Calm, and Calm has an app aspect for the children. And so teaching kids how to take care of themselves so that they don't burn out, I think, is so important.
I was thinking, I have done a lot of individual psychotherapy, but I've also been trained in family systems, family therapy. And what was interesting for me as a psychotherapist, when I was working with children early on in the career, that the parents would, kind of drop the kids off and then go, sit in the parking lot or go sit and read, People magazine while the kid was in there getting counseling. And the family systems approach made so much sense to me, where let's get everybody in there. Like, one kid isn't, an island, and we're just going to, focus on that person. How did they get there? What are the dynamics? What are the roles in the family? What are the rules, spoken, unspoken, those kinds of things. And I never thought I'd be saying this here, but I want to quote Dr. Drew Penske. I never thought I would say that. Somehow in the career, I've picked up his book, and I can't remember the circumstance, but he had, in my opinion, a good book called I had to look it up, The Mirror Effect. And he talked about narcissism in celebrities, and how, the celebrities, can be narcissistic. And I'm not talking necessarily about athletes as much as kind of what do we do as the audience members? How do we project our, I'll say, low self-esteem or a low image, and we're looking for a hero, so to speak. And so we play a role as an audience member or as a family member in wanting the other person to be lifted up, so that we can somehow vicariously kind of benefit from their success. But then, we're in these positions to put them up, raise them up, put them down. And somehow, there's these kind of very complex dynamics or complex attachments. And maybe I'm kind of going too far off the rails here, but there's a dynamic, and, they don't suffer, they're not the problem by themselves. And what role do we play in, supporting them, or the other way? What role do we play in kind of getting them to a low place? So I think a systems approach should, is going to be important. And, family counseling early on, so that, mothers aren't, or fathers, I can stereotype, but aren't projecting their, high school dreams onto their kid and making them play violin when they want to play drums, or, however that would go. So I think that that's also important.
Well said. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, we all have to do our own work. And when we do our own work, it helps our kids. And the family systems approach, I think, is so important. I love what you said. And such an interesting point about the narcissism of athletes or celebrities, and how we as the public contribute to that. And I think sometimes people idealize celebrities or star athletes, and then in turn, they serve a dual function of being heroes, and we put a lot of pressure on them. And we also may feel inadequate in comparison to them, when in reality, we all have our strengths and we all have our challenges. So these celebrities are not perfect, and we are not inadequate. We are all deserving of greatness, and we all have our unique gifts to offer to the world.
And you know what, and again, I don't want to go too far off the field, and I actually want to bring it back to neuroscience for a second. I've been doing this probably, Joyce, as long as maybe you have, and I can firmly say that everybody, depending on how you define this, everybody has low self-esteem. We have low self-esteem moments, and there is, if we start talking about brain networks, and rope it back to neuroscience, that we have a default mode network. So there's a network in our brain, to try to keep it simple here, but a network in our brain that is self-referential, that when we're doing supposedly nothing, our brain wanders to ourself, and it's self-corrective, but it's also self-critical. So we're thinking about, what we're doing wrong, what we need to change. I need to get a haircut. I need to get that report done. I need to take the laundry, whatever. So it's all self-referential. And the problems can be when we don't move ourselves away from the default mode, when we don't start engaging in a task or doing something that, pulls us away from that. Some health conditions can affect the way we switch gears or switch channels. So it's not, I've always told people, it's not the fact that you have a negative judgment of yourself. It's that you dwell on it, or don't change the channel, or don't challenge it, or don't do something about it. Like we should be thinking, at some level, hey, I dropped something on my shirt. I need to change my shirt. That's a normal thought, because if you never have a critical thought, well, you're going to be walking around with slop on your shirt, and whatever. Taking it too far, but that's the point. Is having one moment of the thought is good. Ruminating over and over again, multiple thoughts of I'm no good, add up at the end of the day, or the end of the month, or the end of the year, to depression, or an anxiety condition. So having self-esteem, low self-esteem, isn't the problem as much as what do you do to kind of move out of it.
Absolutely. Right? And there's a chapter in my book on ego, and we all have egos as part of the human condition. And I discuss how I believe that healthy self-esteem is midway between diva and doormat. And dudes can be divas too. But diva and doormat are the two sides of ego, and they both represent low self-worth. And in the middle is healthy self-esteem. So the diva is not respectful of other people's boundaries, and is entitled, and doesn't self-examine. Every problem is somebody else's fault. And then the doormat doesn't respect his or her own boundaries, and doesn't advocate for themselves, and thinks everything's their fault. And so healthy self-esteem is when we kind of dial that in, and we show respect for ourselves and others, and we communicate assertively, we set healthy boundaries, we negotiate, and it's something we all have to work on. And so in my book, I talk about how to silence your inner critic, your inner saboteur, using skills from cognitive behavioral therapy, and then how to cultivate your own self-compassionate voice, how to be your own good parent, your own best friend, and your own positive coach.
We're talking about gymnastics. Why does pudding caps come to mind Do the kids take a tumble? Should they have protection out there? I mean, gymnasts, cheerleaders. You think that plays a role later in life? Because parents listen to this show, technicians listen to this show, clinicians listen to this show. Parents of the athletes, and your kids, taking a tumble out there, they should be paying attention to that, because later in life, I don't know how many hits Simone has taken, but could that be an issue? Jay, Dr. Laura, Skip, I'll hang up again and listen for my answer.
Well, obviously, for gymnastics, there's spotting equipment that protects younger athletes. There's appropriate coaching. You don't want to end up with a coach who ends up pushing past what your capacity is. And at the same time, you have to expand your skill set. You have to reach beyond what your current capabilities are to end up becoming world class. We did a large project with the Australian Institute for Sports, and we looked at world-class athletes' brain activity. We actually identified that they're not normal. In fact, you wouldn't expect them to be normal. I mean, if they were normal, how would they be extraordinary? So they do have outlier features that lend them towards anxiety and lend them towards difficulties with sleep, and lend them towards obsessive traits as well. And you need to be a little bit obsessive. You have to have a high drive mechanism, but those same underlying features that have to be there can also be pathological, and they have to be controlled. The inability to sleep well makes you absolutely, you're not going to be a world-class athlete if you can't sleep. The slow wave sleep gives you growth hormone. It lets you recover from the wear and tear of the intense workouts. I remember being a competitive swimmer, 2 workouts a day plus weights. And, after 2 years at the university, I realized, geez, I'm here for school, not swimming, so I dropped out of that after 2 years of university level competitive swimming. But, it's brutal. And but it has to be. I mean, you're not going to develop yourself to a world-class level unless you're actually pushing yourself. But you need to end up having the ability to counterbalance all that. The inability to sleep can be worked with. Neurofeedback and neuromodulation techniques can end up driving down the beta spindle that we see at the vertex, which is a wakefulness drive, so that sleep can be achieved. And if you're in Australia and you're going to compete internationally, believe me, you're going to have to be able to sleep well, because you're going to be in somebody else's time zone when you're competing. And, having your circadian rhythm upside down doesn't necessarily help your competitive edge. So learning world-class self-regulation is also absolutely required if you're going to actually reach the very peak of anything. I'm hopeful that the inner tremulousness that Simone experienced for 24 hours before her mistake in competition, where she lost where she was in 3-dimensional space in the middle of a twist. And, you can just as easily land on your chin or break your leg. And, I gave examples of just such mistakes earlier. So, it's a brutal world out there. You've got to do self-care in order to make it to the very top. And if you're not willing to step away, you're not doing, full self-care. You have to be ready to step away.
Hey, Joyce, I have a question. Do you guys use neurofeedback? And not to put you on the spot, but do you guys use biofeedback, neurofeedback, any of these systems in your trainings and your therapies?
We have one clinician that specializes in that. I wish we had more, and we do refer out. So we need to get you all connected so that we can refer, because we have offices in your areas.
Oh,
And
that's
so, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, my mentor at Bradley University down in Peoria, she actually has a master's degree program in neurotherapy. So it's a hybrid of using neurofeedback and psychotherapy in the same session. So,
Yes.
you know, isn't that cool that, you know, you're doing therapy with someone and you've got a monitor on them, even if it's for heart rate or breathing rate, temperature. And, you know, as they're talking about these different things that upset them, you can, you know, watch their, you know, brain, you can watch brain rhythm for sure, or their biorhythm on a computer. And hey, that really does bother you. Or look what happens when you do think about X, Y, Z. And it's a very useful tool as a hybrid approach.
I love that. Sounds so comprehensive and helpful. Do you all work with people who have had concussions? I have so many people in my practice who have children who are athletes who've had multiple concussions, are dealing with depression and dealing with great uncertainty about if they should continue their sport and how their brain is recovering or not.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a large part of what we're doing. We rather than do the traditional pre-test for sports, we prefer to do our neuro imaging, so we can get an objective baseline of where people are before they you know enter their season, and then kind of do post-test if they happen to get injured. There's a Pete brought up this concept of pudding cap. I don't know if you caught that, because we talked about that in an earlier show. But a pudding cap, and I'm going to get the wrong century, but probably 1800s, they developed a cap, and it's actually a funny picture if you Google it, of this little, kind of looks like a headband, and it can't, you know, be any kind of protection at all. But they had a belief back in the 1800s that children who you know, bounced around and hit their head, you know, for different reasons, because that's what kids do, they bounce around and hit their head. But the theory was that bouncing as a young person translated later in life to ADHD. So I thought that was a kind of a compelling thing. But we're talking about sports where there's actual, you know, serious injuries and things like that. So the answer to your question is yes. We prefer to, you know, use that kind of information to inform parents of you know, again, baselines and after injury kinds of things. And, you know, to be clear, that neurofeedback is a great intervention to help people with brain injury, you know, whether, you know, it's been a recent injury or one that's occurred, you know, over a period of time, because we could still help those kind of folks as well.
That's amazing. I have a friend and colleague, Dr. Sherry All, who's a neuropsychologist, and I think she would be a great guest on your show. And she's an author on memory. And I think she'd be great for cross referral as well.
Great. No, we'd love to have her.
Oh, that's outstanding.
Mhm.
Joyce, could you give us your websites, please? You have so many. I'll let you pick.
Thank you. So my book can be found at financialmindsetfix.com, and it's being sold on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indie Books, all the major retailers. And then my own website is joycemarter.com, which is JoyceMarter.com. And I'm on all the social media handles, and I definitely need some Instagram love. It is hard to move forward on that, man.
I'm with you on that. It's doing it on a PC, forget about it. Come on, Zuckerberg.
Totally.
Joyce, thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure. You all are doing important work in the world, and such smart, good people. I'm honored to be among you, and I'll spread the word about your podcast and the work that you're doing in the world.
Oh, we'll definitely share links.
You know, head injury ends up being a real common circumstance, but so are other major problems with the brain. Not a functional disturbance like ADD, ADHD, or depression or anxiety, but actually a structural anomaly to the brain, which can include strokes. Now, we had a question from a listener about strokes. And she had multiple strokes. She had an arteriovenous malformation, which ruptured, which they tend to do, bled into the brain, ended up with multiple strokes. And she was inquiring about neurofeedback. And looking at her note, I noticed that the clinic she was intending to go through did not list stroke as something that they worked with. I think that's something you need to look for. I mean, is the person you're thinking of having neurofeedback with or other neuromodulatory work with actually familiar with the disturbance that you have? Is this somebody who only works with ADD and you're coming in with a head injury, a stroke, or a tumor or something? I mean, you've got to match up with the skill set of the therapist. And to think of 30 sessions as a successful set when you have a major problem like strokes or seizures or something like that. It takes longer when you've got major medical problems in the brain to come around to a fix. And at the same time, we can't give specific advice on the show, but we do end up running into people that have major problems in the brain, which require people with extraordinary levels of skill, not just a routine level of work with ADD or, again, more of a dysfunction as opposed to pathological disturbance. And since you brought up head trauma as a common circumstance, of course it is, but so are other more serious things, epilepsy, strokes, etc.
Thank you.
Parents, have your kids get a doodle of their noodle once a season. Hey, if you're going to get a physical checkup, get your brain checked out. That's just a layman talking. Joyce, thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Oh, hey, we thank you all for listening to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast. The contact info for everyone, including Joyce, will be in the podcast notes below. If you have an idea for a topic, please email me, Pete, at neuronoodle.com, or leave a voicemail with the link in the podcast notes. Please give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button. Good luck on Instagram, and follow us on Twitter. And hey, if you really, really, really like us, you can always buy us a coffee on Patreon/NeuroNoodle. Cue the band. Joyce, thank you so much.